الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جود من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما مما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر ما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند مهضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون.
الفاتحة. نعرہ صلوات. عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے ہاں جب شام و سحر فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے جب شام و سحر فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے اور جس وقت اٹھایا نہ گیا لاش جواں کا جس وقت اٹھایا نہ گیا لاش جواں کا تو شہ اس گھڑی اکبر سے زیادہ تجھے روئے ہاں شہ اس گھڑی اکبر سے زیادہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے زینب نے کہا شام غریبا میں اے غازی زینب نے کہا شام غریبا میں اے غازی بے پردہ مجھے دیکھ کے بابا تجھے روئے ہو بے پردہ مجھے دیکھ کے بابا تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے اور سجدے کے لیے جب لیا ہاتھوں کا سہارا سجدے کے لیے جب لیا ہاتھوں کا سہارا تو سجاد مصلی پہ ہمیشہ تجھے روئے تو سجاد مصلی پہ ہمیشہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے اور درہ لیے پہرے پہ ستمگار کھڑا ہے درہ لیے پہرے پہ ستمگار کھڑا ہے ارے کیسے تیرے لاشے پہ سکینہ تجھے روئے کیسے تیرے لاشے پہ سکینہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے اور بن ہاتھ کے کس طرح تو گھوڑے سے گھرا تھا بن ہاتھ کے کس طرح تو گھوڑے سے گھرا تھا یہ سن کے بہت اہل مدینہ تجھے روئے یہ سن کے بہت اہل مدینہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے اور مشکیزہ کہیں جسم کہیں ہاتھ کہیں ہے مشکیزہ کہیں جسم کہیں ہاتھ کہیں ہے ارے جا جا کہ کہاں فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے ہو جا جا کہ کہاں فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے اور ارمان سکینہ کا تھا جتنا تجھے روتی ارمان سکینہ کا تھا جتنا تجھے روتی سجاد تیری قبر پہ اتنا تجھے روئے ہو سجاد تیری قبر پہ اتنا تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے حسرت है कि गाजी हो लहू आँखों से जारी, हसरत है कि गाजी हो लहू आँख से जारी। ये मेरे तकल्लुम कभी ऐसा तुझे रोए, ये मेरे तकल्लुम कभी ऐसा तुझे रोए। अबा से तेरा हक है ज़माना तुझे रोए।
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. My elders, my brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Samir Rajani and I am the Secretary of Masjid al-Husayn. Today I want to share with you a roadmap for the reopening of Masjid al-Husayn with safety in mind. Our primary objective is to ensure the safety of you, our members, and we will do this by continuous improvement. We will monitor, we will review the situation, and we will update the community. We have developed a status tracker to help keep everyone informed. Green being Alhamdulillah, this means the mosque is open. Orange being Astaghfirullah, meaning while we are still open, we must make improvements and continue to work towards green. Red being Insha'Allah, this means unfortunately we have to close the mosque to reassess and make improvements and reopen. We will be opening the mosque in 3 phases. Phase 1 will allow for individual prayers only. This means no congregational prayers, no weddings, no classes, no meetings and tours. Phase 2, we will allow for smaller gatherings only. And Phase 3, the final phase, will be the new norm, where we are open once again for congregational prayers, for majalises and all community events, inshallah. Transitioning between each of the 3 phases will be determined by continuously monitoring, reviewing and updating our status tracker. We have set up a 5-step plan taking guidance from key authorities including the UK government, COEG, MCB and medical experts, which ensures the health and safety of our community during these unprecedented times. Step 1. Allocate a COVID safety officer. We have appointed Brother Arif Karim as our COVID safety officer. If you have any questions on the reopening of the mosque or COVID itself, with anything to do with this issue, then please contact Brother Arif Karim. The information will be kept in strict confidence. Step 2. Establish scope for phase 1. Individual prayers only. This means we won't be holding any congregational prayers, meetings, classes or tourists. Step number 3. Carry out a risk assessment. At each phase we will carry out a risk assessment to ensure that the mosque is fit for purpose to be opened. Step 4. Establish baseline safety measures and principles, which I will be highlighting to you shortly. And the final step, step number 5, is to communicate baseline safety measures and principles to the management committee, to the trustees and to you, the members. As we welcome you back to the mosque, you will see some changes to ensure that your safety is principal. Hand sanitizers, face masks and latex gloves are made available at the entrance points for your use. There is an attendee register as you walk into the mosque. We are keeping this to manage and monitor the community if a COVID outbreak was to occur within the mosque. We request attendees to maintain hygiene and practice social distancing when in the mosque or in the Imam Bargah. This means you should not shake hands, hug or kiss each other. You should also refrain from touching the zari and alarms. You will notice access to the wudu area and toilets have been closed off, so please come prepared from home. Social distancing is required throughout the mosque, and this has been clearly marked across the entrance and the foyer. In the Masjid area, we have created designated spaces for you to ensure safe distancing is maintained at all times. Entry and exit points have been clearly marked with directional arrows and will be controlled. Mosque will open 15 minutes before prayer time and remain open 10 minutes after use. Bring your own prayer mats, turba, chadars. We also request all attendees to bring their own Quran and dua books. No food will be served during phase 1. Windows will be left open for fresh air, and air conditioning units will be switched off to avoid contamination. We expect no elderly, children, the sick with underlying conditions, and those with COVID symptoms not to attend to ensure safe use of the mosque. We pray and we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps us safe throughout this pandemic and ensures your safety as well as the safety of the wider community. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. آمنا به. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Respected elders, scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us the opportunity to commemorate the wafat, the death anniversary of the fifth infallible of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam, Muhammad al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. And we send our condolences to the Imam of our time for the passing of his great-grandfather. May Allah accept our a'mal during these nights of the Hajjah, during these days of the Hajjah, preparing us for the coming of the day of Arafah and preparing us for the coming of the day of Eid. When we speak about Imam Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh, a very important note needs to be mentioned, and that is of his progeny or his lineage. From the one side, we see that the Imam alayhi salam is a descendant of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayh, from his son Imam al-Husayn alayhi salatu was salam. Being the grandson of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, his lineage is directly connected to the Holy Prophet of Islam. But at the same time, he is also connected to the Holy Prophet of Islam from his mother's side as well. For indeed, he is the son of Fatima, the daughter of Imam al-Hassan, salawatullahi wa salamhu alayhi. So when you look at his lineage, both from his father and his mother's side, they are connected to Sayyid Shababi Ahl al-Jannah, the two princes of paradise, Imam Hassan as well as Imam Husayn alayhi salam, linking his lineage from both his father and his mother directly to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayh. And this is something fundamental and phenomenal, to see that the Imam from both his father and his mother's side comes from a pure progeny. And of course, when you look into the history of Fatima, the daughter of Imam al-Hassan, she is known to be a noble woman, an honorable woman, a woman of piety, a woman of purity, belonging in the house of infallibility. So you find that his nature, his character, being raised in a house of purity, of infallibility, he indeed takes on many of the fada'il of his father, as-Sajjad salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. So when you examine his history, you find that his history, historically, his title al-Baqir is given to him, and he is known as al-Baqir. Baqir comes from the word bakar, and bakar means when you split something open to extract what is hidden in the depths of this earth. It's usually associated with the earth, that when you dig, for example, deep enough, a fissure that exists or that is created in the face of this earth, that is able to extract what is hidden from the depths of this earth. And that is often given the name Bakar. And that is applied, or that title is applied to the Imam alayhi salam, which means that the Imam had such profound level of knowledge that he was able to go deep into the depths or the inner reality of certain knowledge and find its origin. Knowledge not just pertaining to this world, not just dunyawi knowledge, but knowledge with respects to akhirah as well. And so when you refer to, for example, this particular title, this title was not given to him by the people of his time. That from the one area is true, that the people of his time began to refer to him as al-Baqir alayhi salam. But this title in its original sense was given to him by the Holy Prophet of Islam. When Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari one day approaches the Holy Prophet, he says to Jabir, he says, "Oh Jabir, one day you will meet one of my grandsons, and he will be given the name al-Baqir. His name will be my name, Muhammad, and his title will be that of al-Baqir." Why? Because yabkaru ilman bakara, because he will split open knowledge and he will find the inner dimensions of that knowledge. And he will of course propagate and perform tabligh of the religion of Islam using this knowledge that has been given to him. And so when you examine this particular title of al-Baqir, we realize that this is something that has been agreed upon by both fariqain, by both the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and the Shia, that all of our scholars from amongst the Shia madhab as well as the madhab of our dear brothers, you find that each and every scholar has testified the knowledge of Imam Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam. That when you refer to, for example, the words of Shamsuddin al-Dhahabi, a profound Sunni scholar, he says that al-Baqir, referring to the son of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he says that he was given the title al-Baqir. It was because of his outstanding merit, it was because of his knowledge, it was because of his wisdom and his righteousness that he was able to split open knowledge and he knew its hidden origin and realities. Not only was he the foremost in knowledge, but in righteous deeds. He was the foremost in honor. He was trustworthy, and he was, of course, more appropriate towards the succession. It's a very important ibara, expression that he begins to expand on. He says, Al-Baqir kana ahlun lil khilafa. that al-Baqir alayhi salam was most definitely suitable and appropriate for the caliphate, more so than any of his contemporaries of his time. But then you find that when you look at, for example, some of the other works of Shamsuddin al-Dhahabi, he is very much guilty of downplaying the reputation of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhim ajma'in. So you find, for example, in certain works, he speaks about how there were certain scholars far greater in tafsir, in fuqaha, compared to Imam Baqir alayhi salatu wasalam. But then in this particular work, he says that he was the most foremost in knowledge, and the most foremost in merits, and the most foremost in doing righteous deeds. And he was Ahlul Khilafah. So there is contradiction in many of his words with respects to Imam Baqir alayhi salam. When you refer to, for example, the words of An-Nawawi, he says al-Baqir, referring to Muhammad al-Baqir, he says he was a leading member in his generation. He was a skillful imam, a scholar, and many have unanimously agreed with regards to his greatness. He was one of the mujtahideen, one of the fuqaha of the city of Medina. These are the words of An-Nawawi. When you refer to, for example, the words of Ibn Hajar al-Haythami in his Sawa'iq al-Muharraka, again he testifies, he says al-Baqir was known as Baqir because of the word Bakar. He split open knowledge, and he would make things hidden manifest. He would make all of that which was hidden apparent. And he was known to be a righteous man. And not only that, but when he manifested and made clear knowledge that was hidden, it was made clear in such a way that it was understandable even for the commoner. That when people would listen to his words, they would understand his words. And this is something that is profound when you read the history of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. That they would take very complicated ideas and concepts and be able to transform them into simple language. They would speak the language of the audience, of the people, such that that knowledge was very much applicable and much received clearly by those listening. And so Ibn Hajar al-Haythami goes on to say that not only was he the foremost in knowledge, but his deeds were honest. He was an honorable person, he was a noble person, and he spent many a times in the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when you look at the history of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, we realize that the Imam alayhi salam was known as al-Baqir because he was able to spend many of his time preaching and giving knowledge. Historically, when you examine his biography, we see that it was a time that he was able to institutionalize, he was able to establish many of the madaris, many of the Islamic institutions of his time, especially in Medina, as well as in Kufa, as well as in Qom, in Khorasan, as well as in the city of Rai, modern day Tehran. He was able to establish a connection amongst the Shias in these particular cities, which we'll come to in the following moments. To the extent that when you refer to the riwayat that we have, and many of the hundreds upon thousands of riwayats that we have, a majority of them are narrated by Imam Baqir alayhi salam. And the majority of them are narrated by his son Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam as well. To the extent that these two Imams, politically, it was a time of ease for them, and in one way or another they were able to open the floodgates of knowledge. These two Imams, starting from al-Baqir alayhi salam, saw an opportunity to spread the message of Rasulullah, to spread the message, the Risala, the message of the Holy Prophet according to his interpretation and the interpretation of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They saw this opportunity, they grabbed it, and they began spreading the knowledge of Islam. To the extent that many were attracted by them, and because of their knowledge. Now someone may come and ask the question and say, why is it that al-Baqir was known as al-Baqir alayhi salam? It was because of his knowledge. It was because of how well he was able to spread his knowledge and perform tabligh in the risala of the message of Islam. But then the question is, aren't all the other Imams known as al-Baqir as well? Imam Baqir alayhi salam is known as al-Baqir not because he was the most knowledgeable compared to all the other 12 Imams, but rather because of the time that he lived in. His environment was such that he was able to give knowledge. But when you look at the history of the other A'immah alayhim salam, they did not live in a time where they were able to give such knowledge the way Imam Baqir was able to give knowledge. When you look at, for example, the titles of the other Imam, As-Sadiq, does that mean that Imam Jaffer was known as Sadiq without al-Baqir not being known as As-Sadiq? Ali ibn Abi Talib was known as As-Sadiq. Imam Hassan was known as As-Sadiq. Imam al-Rida was known as As-Sadiq. They were all truthful. Al-Jawad, for example, he was the most generous. But so was Imam Husayn alayhi salam. He was Al-Jawad as well. He was generous as well. The idea is that the environment played a role in the title that was given to them. Al-Baqir, Imam Al-Baqir was known as the one who gave knowledge and split open knowledge. Because the people of his time recognized his ilm. They recognized his position in society. They recognized him as a faqih and as a scholar, and they were naturally attracted to him. And what's amazing is that Hisham ibn Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the Umayyad Caliph of the time, realized this. He realized that the people were naturally being attracted towards the Imam. And when he saw that the people were flocking towards the Imam, all of a sudden certain pressures were placed on the Imam himself. So he tried to limit, for example, the amount of communication that the people had, the amount of correspondence that was engaged with the Imam alayhi salam, and so on and so forth. But now someone may come and ask the question, what happened politically at that time that the Imam was able to then profoundly give knowledge the way he was able to give knowledge? That the Imam was free to give knowledge, that such that his father as-Sajjad was not given this opportunity, or for example his grandsons were not given such opportunities as well. Well, there are two reasons for this. Historians talk about this, and of course there is great debate with regards to this itself. They say one of the reasons why Imam al-Baqir was able to give such profound levels of knowledge was because of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, when he became the caliph, they say he was the most praiseworthy amongst the Umayyad caliphs. He had some leniency, he had some sympathy towards Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhim ajma'in. When he came into power, they say that one of the first order of businesses that he engaged with was the revival of the recording of ahadith. So he wrote letters to all of the governors in the Muslim empire to make it a responsibility upon themselves to gather all of the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. Because the recording of ahadith had been made forbidden at the time of Abu Bakr, at the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And because ahadith was not being recorded or transmitted, especially that which was said by Rasulullah himself, the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi had become or had entered a state of confusion. There were many ahadith that had been fabricated, many concepts had been lost. And so Umar ibn Abdul Aziz saw it a necessity to revive the recording and the transmission of ahadith. And because in the time, or in this particular time, ahadith were now being recorded and transmitted, Imam al-Baqir took this opportunity to further engage in the recording and the transmission of ahadith. So many of his companions came towards him, they began listening to him, they began sitting with him, discussing with him, Q&A sessions were being held and so on and so forth, and they began writing the recording, and they began recording the narrations of Imam Baqir alayhi salatu wasalam. This is one of the reasons as to why we have so many narrations going back to Imam Baqir alayhi salam. Secondly, when you look at, for example, at that particular time, after Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, towards Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, towards, for example, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the Bani Umayyah were now weakening. Because there were a number of thawrat, a number of uprisings that were existing towards the Bani Umayyah. People had enough of the Bani Umayyah. They were angered towards the Bani Umayyah. And so different uprisings were taking place, different revolutions were taking place. And this somehow managed to weaken the power of the Bani Umayyah. The final revolution was, of course, the revolution of the Bani Abbas that takes place in the time of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. But these uprisings and these revolutions, they began at the time of Imam Sajjad. It peaked at the time of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, and of course at the time of Imam Sadiq, the Umayyad were toppled completely. And because their position had weakened at the time of Imam al-Baqir had flexibility to expand and to perform tabligh and to safeguard the message of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And so for that reason, the Imam alayhi salam had a lot of flexibility in engaging in the tabligh of the religion of Islam. And so the Imam, in part of his tabligh, he focuses on three different areas. Number one, reviving the true theology, reviving the true aqa'id of Islam. And so many debates were taking place in his time where he safeguards the message of Rasulullah by shining light on the true aqeedah. Number two, fiqh and ahkam. There are many laws which have been explained by Imam Baqir alayhi salam. Many debates, again, munadharat were taking place in his time where he began to shine light or shed light on the true ahkam of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And of course, akhlaq. The third area which he focused heavily on was akhlaq. In which way? The Imam alayhi salam had a vision. And this vision was very clear in many of his words of how to create a reformed society, how to create a spiritual society. And this is the discussion in itself, but just to give you a glimpse of his vision, the Imam alayhi salam begins to explain that in order to create spirituality, brotherhood, sisterhood, in order to create a strong community, a strong society, a godly society, individuals need to make certain things their own responsibility. That every person should take and make it a responsibility of themselves to carry out certain tasks and to carry out certain things in their lives. Number one, to take on the social responsibility of creating and looking after the people in the community, especially the orphans, the needy, the fuqara, to engage in silat al-raham, for example. So on the one hand, people should try and create a relationship between other people. Number two, how people should create a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How to engage in ibadat. How to engage and create a relationship with the Quran. How to engage, for example, in certain ibadats, in du'as, for example. Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, his method of tabligh was through du'a. Imam al-Baqir carried this on and he engaged in tabligh through dua and ziyarat and so on and so forth. And thirdly, how to create a relationship with the environment around us. So the Imam alayhi salam culminates these three aspects and manifests the knowledge of akhlaq and how we should become spiritual beings so that we can seek proximity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Imam alayhi salam focuses heavily on how a community should reform itself. But in today's discussion, I want to focus on one key area that the Imam alayhi salam focuses on in his method of tabligh. Because Imam was known as al-Baqir, the one who split open knowledge, you find that many of the fada'il of gaining and seeking knowledge goes back to him. Many of the ahadith that we have about the excellences of seeking knowledge, the benefits of seeking knowledge, the rewards of seeking knowledge, traces back to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and his father Imam Baqir alayhi salam. And we've spoken about this, we've shed light upon this many a times before in our previous majalis. But in tonight's majlis, I want to focus on the responsibilities of the person who gains and seeks knowledge. Imam Baqir alayhi salam doesn't just go forth and encourage people to seek knowledge. He goes a step ahead and he says that the responsibilities of those who gain and yearn knowledge, those who seek knowledge, those who find knowledge, they too have a responsibility. And there are a few points, about 7-8 points, which I want to focus on. And then we can end the majlis with the Masaib of Imam al-Baqir salawatullahi wassalamu alayhi. The first message or the first point on the responsibilities of those who gain knowledge is that number one, a person should have the motivation to seek knowledge. Tafaqahu fi ad-deen, for example, as the Imam alayhi salam engages and speaks about. How does one go about seeking knowledge? The Imam begins to explain the importance of asking questions. The Imam doesn't just come forward and say, seek knowledge. No, he gives us a strategy of how a person should seek knowledge. He says, ask questions. Because when a person asks questions, even today, for example, asking questions is one of the greatest ways of seeking knowledge. A person can read books, a person can listen to majalis, but the most beneficial way of seeking knowledge is by asking questions. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, as the ayah of the Holy Quran explains. Ask those who do not know, if you do not, ask those who know if you do not know. That many a times, you find that when we think and we ponder upon Allah's creation, when we ponder upon, for example, certain aspects of fiqh, when we focus on certain areas within our religion, naturally questions arise. We should then make it a responsibility upon ourselves to ask and try and find answers to these questions. To always ask questions. And Islam does not shy away from the idea of asking questions. And of course, the famous hadith of Imam Baqir alayhi salam, he says that when a person asks questions, there are a number of people who benefit from this and a number of people who are rewarded from this. Number one, the person asking the question, the sa'il, is rewarded by Allah. Number two, the mustami', the one who is listening to these questions being asked, is rewarded as well. Number three, the muallim, the one teaching and providing the answer to the question, is also rewarded as well. So you find that the strategy that the Imam alayhi salam focuses on first and foremost is by asking questions. Profound hadith of the Imam says that ilm is a khaza'in, it is a safe. And the miftah to this safe, the keys to this safe, is by asking questions. Number two, you find that when it comes to the fadila of seeking knowledge, the Imam makes it categorically clear. Explains that when a person seeks knowledge and he has the right intention to seek knowledge, will safeguard him. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam in one hadith, when he compares the fadila of knowledge and wealth, what does he say? He says wealth is belittled by knowledge. Knowledge is far greater than wealth. Why? Because wealth, you need to protect it, whereas knowledge protects you. How does knowledge protect us? We live in a world where there are many ideas and many deviances when it comes to our aqaid. We will find, for example, there are many opinions when it comes to certain areas in fiqh and akhlaq and so on and so forth. If a person is rooted in his knowledge, if a person has studied the religion of Islam the way it ought to be studied, then you will be able to decipher haqq from batil. You'll be able to understand the truth from falsehood. That's why Imam Baqir alayhi salam in this profound narration, he says that the person, that an alim yuntafu bi'ilmihi afdalu min sab'ina alif abid, that an alim benefits from his ilm, or the people around him benefit from the ilm of an alim better than how they benefit from 70,000 worshippers. And an alim, the position of an alim is far greater than the position of an abid, the worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In a separate narration he explains, he says that the death of an alim is far more loved and beloved to Iblis than the death of 70 worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number three, when it comes to the ideas and the responsibilities of those who have knowledge, the Imam goes on to explain that those who find knowledge and those who are considered to be from Ahl al-Ilm, you now have a responsibility to be humble, to have zuhud, to be a zahid of this world, to keep yourself safeguarded from the pleasures of this world. This is something that the Imam focuses on. That when you look at a faqih first and foremost must have abstinence to this world and not be attracted to the beauties of this world. Number two, he must yearn for the akhirah. And number three, he must hold on to the principles of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam and the sunnah and the practices of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. These are profound words. In fact, when you read the histories of certain mujtahideen and maraja', you find that some of them were wealthy, some of them were known to be successful businessmen, But we don't recognize them as being wealthy individuals of this world. We recognize them through their ilm. We recognize them through their knowledge and how they contributed to this madhab. Number two, moving on, you find, for example, one of the responsibilities of Ahl al-Ilm is that he should always be in the state of ihtiyat. He should always be conscious when he uses his tongue to give tabligh, especially when it comes to the areas of giving answers. Many a times, as human beings, we are known to be deficient. We are known to be weak when it comes to gaining knowledge. Not all of us have the ability to know everything. In fact, it's impossible for all human beings to know everything and everything in this world. We are deficient when it comes to gaining knowledge. More so than that, in preserving that knowledge within our minds. When you have someone who asks a question, it can be difficult at times to answer. And it's perfectly understandable if you do not know the answer. Upon which the Imam alayhi salam begins to speak about this area. He says, very famously in one narration, he says that when it comes to asking questions and giving answers, give answers to the questions that you know. But perform tawaqquf, do not give answers for which you do not know. Half of deen is when we say we do not know, and it's perfectly normal if a person does not know the answer to a particular question. We find, for example, famous Maraj, famous Allama Majlisi being one of them, Sheikh al-Mufid being another. They would sit on the seat of the podium and the manabir and the Masjid, and they would give lessons. And many a times when their students would give them questions to answer, they would respond by saying, I do not know the answer to these questions. Even the greatest of our scholars used to admit that their knowledge was limited, that their knowledge had certain levels and capacities. When you do not know the answer to a question, make it a responsibility to go home and seek the answer. But do not do not feel pressured to give an answer. Because the Imam alayhi salam, al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi explains, it is better to remain hesitant and not know an answer to a question than to enter a state of halak, destruction and annihilation by knowing the wrong answer to a question. In fact, he goes on to explain that the right of Allah upon His creation is that His creation should speak for what they know and should remain silent in areas which they do not know. Moving on, you find that the Imam alayhi salam, when he begins to speak about the responsibilities of those who have knowledge, of those who reach knowledge, is the idea of establishing what is known as marja'iyya ilmiyya. The Imam alayhi salam creates an element known as the element of marja'iyya. Marja, we have this concept in this day and age. A marja, what does it mean, a marja? A marja means a person who is a referral point, a point of reference. I today in my fiqh, for example, if there are certain answers that I do not know of, if there are certain masail that I need help understanding, I refer to a marja to shed light on the aspects of fiqh. Imam Baqir alayhi salam in his day and age creates an element of marji'iyya as well, but different to the concept of marji'iyya that we know of today. Which element or which type of an element of reference does he create in his time? The Imam alayhi salam creates a reference point towards the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. He creates a system where if people are in need of help in gaining knowledge, in extracting information, whether it be in terms of history, whether it be in terms of riwayat, whether it be in terms of tafsir, a person should always refer back to the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. And there are many narrations with regards to this area. Imam Baqir alayhi salam, for example, is known to narrate. He says that there is not a single person in the face of this world, from the east to the west, who knows the entire knowledge of the Quran, the dimensions, the inner dimensions of the Quran, or even the surface dimensions of the Quran, except us, the Ahl al-Bayt, except the awsiya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the awsiya are most definitely considered to be the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. In a separate narration, he explains, he says, there is not a single person on the face of this earth, not in the east nor in the west, who has the truth in his hands or has the haqiqah in his hands, the reality in his hands. And not a single person on the face of this earth can give rulings the way we are able to give rulings, the Ahl al-Bayt. In a separate narration, he explains, he says that when Adam came towards the face of this earth, came towards the surface of this earth, when he came from the heavens to the earth, knowledge also came with him. But when Adam returned back to the Akhirah, that knowledge did not go with him. It did not leave this world the way Adam left this world. In fact, that knowledge was inherited by his son. That knowledge was then inherited to his sons from one prophet to another. That knowledge was inherited until it reached my grandfather Rasulullah. And then it was inherited by my grandfather Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And it was passed down from one Imam to another until it reached al-Baqir salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi. That's why in their ziyarat, what do we say? We say that they are warith al-ilm al-nabiyyin. Yes? Whenever we refer to Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, and we say, Assalamu alayka ya warith Adam sifwatillah, and Musa Kalimullah, and Isa Ruhullah, and Ibrahim Khalilullah. What does it mean? It means that they are the inheritors of the knowledge of the Anbiya. Knowledge which was inherited from one infallible to another until it reaches the Imam alayhi salam. So you find that in this area the Imam explains that the responsibilities of those who seek knowledge or those who gain knowledge is to always refer back to Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And then he goes on to explain in this next point, he says that those who have knowledge should always make it upon themselves to give it back to the community. That those who have knowledge, the zakat of knowledge is that you give back to your community. And our discussion is on knowledge. It's not just on Islamic knowledge. Knowledge can be of different areas and different areas. Knowledge can be of different dimensions as well. There can be knowledge of dunya and there can be knowledge of akhirah as well. Knowledge is knowledge. If it benefits you in the akhirah, good. If it benefits you in dunya, fabiha wa ni'ma. Give that knowledge to the community people as well. If you are a specialist in certain areas, come towards the community and give that knowledge to the children of our community. Or those who are interested, do not keep that knowledge for yourself. And therefore you find that one of the profound qualities of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, which really highlights his vision as a leader and as an imam, a person who safeguards the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was that he was able to pinpoint the skills and he was able to pinpoint the specialists of his from amongst his companions. There were certain from amongst his companions, they were known to be scholars but of different areas and different fields. The Imam highlights here that if a person wants to become a specialist, go ahead and become a specialist in that area. There were certain areas, certain members of his companions who were known to be mutakallimin, those who specialized in aqa'id, like Hisham ibn Hakim. Hisham ibn Hakim was known to be a powerful debater. They say that when the people used to come to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam to debate the Imam alayhi salam, the Imam would refer them first to Hisham ibn Hakim. If they were able to destroy Hisham ibn Hakim in their discussions, then they would be upgraded. Then they would have the fadila of debating with the Imam himself. And so you found that Hisham ibn Hakim had such a level and such a profound level of knowledge that the people were unable to defeat him in his debates. You had, for example, amongst the companions of Imam Baqir, there were those who were known to be fuqaha, those who specialized in fiqh, like Zurara ibn Ayun, like Muhammad ibn Muslim. Then you had mufassirin, like Aban ibn Taghlib. They say that the Imam used to cater for their specialized knowledge. The Imam used to look after them, train them in their respected fields. You find, for example, there were mathematicians and there were chemists and biologists like Jabir ibn Hayyan, who was trained as well by the infallible as well. And so, what we learn from this is that as parents, as teachers, as scholars within the communities, when we see our children in the communities who love certain areas, who have or incline to certain fields in particular, let's not squash their interest. Let's feed and nurture that interest that they have so that they become specialists in that particular field, so that they are able to be productive to the community in the future. They say that Imam Baqir alayhi salam turns to his son As-Sadiq and he says to his son, he says, "Oh my son, our companions, look after them." Imam Sadiq replies, he says, "Ya abati." He says, "Oh my father, I will train our companions in such a way that they will become needless from asking questions. I will nurture their specialized field. I will nurture their interest in such a way that they become the foremost and they become the specialized personnel in their fields, such that they will become needless from asking questions. In fact, people will come to them in seeking answers." And so you find that the Imam alayhi salam nurtures his companions and helps them to become professionals in their fields. And finally, the Imam, because of his knowledge and his level of knowledge, he begins to expand the madaris in the empire, in the Muslim empire. He establishes, for example, the Islamic institution in the city of Medina, and many scholars were bred in the city of Medina. Many scholars were bred in Kufa. Kufa had an inclination and had love towards the Ahl al-Bayt, and there was constant communication and correspondence back and forth. They find, to the extent that Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, when he saw that the people of Iraq had a great communication or line of communication with Imam Baqir alayhi salam, he forbade the people of Kufa, especially the people of Iraq, to migrate or to even travel towards the city of Medina. Correspondence stopped between Iraq and Medina. You find that the people of Qom, the madaris in Qom had been established, the madaris in the city of Ray had been established, the madaris in the city of Khurasan had been established. And these were originally the people of Kufa who were exiled in the time of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, in the time of Ibn Ziyad, Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad. Exiled, thousands of family had been exiled and they moved towards Iran. And of course, the influence of the Ahl al-Bayt began to grow in the country of Iran. And so the correspondence that existed between the Imam alayhi salam and the cities in Iran was great in amount. Not only that, but you find that one of the greatest strategies that was employed by Imam Baqir alayhi salam was to revive and to continue the azaa of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. One of the responsibilities that he highlights to the people of knowledge, to the Ahl al-Ilm, was to never forget and never discontinue the majalis of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. He would encourage people to come and recite poetry for Abi Abdullah. He would encourage people to come in public and to perform the lamentations and to perform the majalis and to perform poetry, the recitation of poetry for Abi Abdullah. He would encourage his followers to come and to weep for Abi Abdullah. In certain narrations, he admonishes his companions to hold the majalis of Imam al-Husayn in the privacy of their homes, even if they fear the hukam, the oppressors of their times. Never should they stop the majalis of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. They say that Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, because of his jealousy, أَيَحْسَدُونَ النَّاسَ عَلَى مَا آتَاهُمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ, because of the fadila that was given to Imam Baqir, his enemies had great jealousy towards him. Hisham, the son of Abd al-Malik, they say because of the jealousy that towards Imam al-Baqir, because of the attraction that people had towards Imam al-Baqir, he plots a scheme, he plans and he poisons the Imam alayhi salam. The Imam, when he consumes the poison begins to affect his body and it begins to affect his limbs. the poison which then eventually destroys his body from within, which eventually kills him. In his final moments as he lays in his deathbed, the Imam alayhi salam turns to his son Aba Abdullah as-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says to his son, "Oh my son, I have one wish for you." His son says to him, "My father, what is your final testament for me?" He says, "Oh my son, I have left some money. Use this money to encourage the people. Use this money to observe the aza and the majalis of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. Invite the people for niyaz and invite the people. Prepare food for the mu'mineen and prepare poetry for the mu'mineen. Always continue the aza of my grandfather Abi Abdullah alayhi salam." And this is the sunnah of Imam Baqir as well as Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. To perform the niyaz for Imam al-Husayn, to perform marsiya and lamentation for Imam al-Husayn, and to perform majalis for Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. He says to his son, "Continue the majalis of Abi Abdullah." We ask Imam al-Baqir, "Yabna Rasulallah, why so much emphasis towards the majlis, towards the azah of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam?" The reason is because the Imam was there on the 10th of Muharram. The Imam was 4 or 5 years of age when he saw his uncle slaughtered before his eyes. When he saw Abbas, when his hands were slaughtered by the enemies of Allah. When he saw Ali al-Akbar, when the spear pierced his heart. When he saw the hooves of the horses trampling on the body of Qasim, his uncle. When he saw his uncle Ali al-Asghar and the arrow of Hormala which pierced his neck. When he saw his grandfather Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, and how the dagger of Shamar ibn Dhil-Joshan struck the neck of Abi Abdullah. He was there on the 10th of Muharram. When he saw how weak his father was, Zainul Abidin alayhi salam. Whenever he would remember his father, his grandfather, he would cry and he would lament. In one narration, Imam Baqir narrates, he says, on the 10th of Muharram, when the battle had finished, when no men were alive, when all of them were slaughtered and the sons of Karbala, the women wanted to get together and remember Abi Abdullah and perform the azah of Abi Abdullah. When they came and they sat to perform the azah of Abi Abdullah, what did I see? He said, "I saw the charging of the battle horses towards the camps of the women of the Ahl al-Bayt. They came towards the women of the Ahl al-Bayt and they entered the tents and they took the belongings of the Ahl al-Bayt. They looted and plundered the possessions of the Ahl al-Bayt. La ilaha illallah." He says there was one woman in particular. This woman was my aunt Fatima, the daughter of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. When one enemy of Allah with a spear in his hands came towards her and approached her, and he began slapping her and he began pulling on her earrings, snatching it from her. But this man was weeping and crying, upon which my aunt Fatima says to this man, "Oh man, why do you harass me? Why do you oppress me? But at the same time you cry and you weep." The man replies, he says, "Oh daughter of Rasulullah, how can I not cry when I oppress the daughters of Rasulullah?" This is how the enemies of Allah were. Upon which my aunt Fatima said to him, "Then why do you oppress me? If you have sympathy towards the daughters of Rasulullah. Upon which this man says, if I do not take these things from you, then someone else will come and take this from you. They say on the 10th of Muharram, when Zainab could not find Sukaina, she was in fear that Sukaina had been killed. She runs from one area to another. She runs from one land to another looking for Sukaina. She then proceeds towards the body of her brother Abi Abdullah. She finds Sukaina embracing the chest of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. She finds Sukaina on the chest of her father, unconscious. She approaches Sukaina. She awakes Sukaina. Sukaina is awoken. She then says to Sukaina, "Oh Sukaina, let's go back to the women. Let's go back to the congregation. Let's join the others. They are worried for you." Sukaina then alongside Zainab, her aunt, she walks towards the tent. She then says to her aunt, she says, "Ya Zainab, oh my aunt, I saw my father in my dream. My father said to me, oh Sukaina, tell my Shia, oh Sukaina, tell my Shia, oh my Shia, whenever you drink water, then remember me. Remember the thirst of Karbala." Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Sayalamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun. Before ending the majlis, if we can recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all the marhumin, inshaAllah. Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha.
Bawafa ya Abbas, Bawafa ya Abbas. سب مل کے میرے ساتھ پڑھیں. باوفا یا عباس. سب مل کے. باوفا عباس. باوفا یا عباس. سب مل کے. باوفا عباس. محفوظ قافلہ ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. 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 محفوظ ماشاءاللہ عباس جو زندہ ہے. محفوظ قافلہ ہے عباس جو زندہ. سب مل کے. محفوظ قافلہ ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. محفوظ قافلہ ہے ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ. سب مل کے. تو ابھی دور قافلہ ہے عباس ہے. اب دور کربلا ہے عباس ہو. عباس جو زندہ ہے ہو. اس نوری کارواں میں نوری ہماریاں ہیں. نوری ہماریوں میں نوری سواریاں ہیں. نوری سواریاں ہیں. سر پر علم کھلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور دور کربلا ہے عباس. سب مل کے ابھی دور کربلا ہے. سب مل کے ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ہو عباس جو زندہ ہے نامحرموں کا مجمع ہٹ ہٹ کے ہے گزرتا. پہرے میں باوفا کے طے ہو رہا ہے رستہ. طے ہو رہا ہے رستہ. ہو کیا شان و دبدبا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ. سب مل کے ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ. ہو عباس جو زندہ ہے. عباس جیسا بھائی سالار کارواں کا. بولے حسین مجھ کو اب کوئی غم کہاں ہے. اب کوئی غم کہاں ہے. ہر غم کی یہ دوا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس. ماشاءاللہ سب مل کے ہو ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. زینب حیا کی ملکہ کلثوم اور رقیہ لیلا رباب پروا کبرا سکینہ فیضا. کبرا سکینہ فیضا. ہر بی بی باردہ ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس. ماشاءاللہ سب مل کے ہو ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ. ہو عباس جو زندہ ہے. اصغر سے کھیلتی ہے خوش ہے بہت سکینہ. جب چاہتی ہے سونا ہے بابا جاں کا سینہ. ہے بابا جاں کا سینہ. غم سے نہ آشنا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ہو عباس جو زندہ ہے. ہو عباس جیسا بھائی سالار کارواں کا. بولے حسین مجھ کو اب کوئی غم کہاں ہے. اب کوئی غم کہاں ہے. ہر غم کی یہ دوا ہے عباس جو زندہ ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے. ابھی دور کربلا ہے یا حسین یا حسین. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها الباقر بعلم الله. السلام عليك أيها الفاحص عن دين الله. السلام عليك أيها المبين لحكم الله. السلام عليك أيها القائم بقسط الله. السلام عليك أيها الناصح لعباد الله. السلام عليك أيها الداعي إلى الله. السلام عليك أيها الدليل على الله. السلام عليك أيها الحبل المتين. السلام عليك أيها الفضل المبين. السلام عليك أيها النور الساطع. السلام عليك أيها البدر اللامع. السلام عليك أيها الحق الأبلج. السلام عليك أيها السراج الأسراج. السلام عليك أيها النجم الأزهر. السلام عليك أيها الكوكب الأبهر. السلام عليك أيها المعصوم من الزلات. السلام عليك أيها الزكي في الحساب. السلام عليك أيها الرفيع في النسب. السلام عليك أيها القصر المشيد. السلام عليك يا حجة الله على خلقه أجمعين. أشهد يا مولاي أنك صدعت بالحق صدعا، وبقرت العلم بقرا، ونشرته نشرا. لا تأخذك في الله لومة لائم، وقضيت ما كان عليك، وأخرجت أولياءك من ولاية غير الله إلى ولاية الله، وأمرت بطاعة الله ونهيت عن معصية الله، حتى قبضك الله إلى رضوانه، وذهب بك إلى دار كرامته، وإلى مساكن أصفيائه، ومجاورة أوليائه. والسلام عليك ورحمة الله وبركاته.
العظيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين علي ولي الله. أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وسلم.